For centuries, the Bible has been used as a weapon. It's been a tool to condemn, to exclude, and to justify prejudice. For countless LGBTQ+ people, its verses have been the source of unbelievable pain. A divine rejection shouted from pulpits in churches that were supposed to be safe, and it's driven people away from a God they were told was love, but who never seemed to show them any. Feeling that kind of spiritual loneliness is a deep wound. It's the feeling that the most core parts of who you are, ability to love, your desire for connection, are not just flawed, but forbidden. It's a special kind of cruel being cast out from the very source of meaning and community that so many other people find comfort in. It's forced generations of people into a horrible choice: your faith or your identity. You can't have both. Not just a mistake, but a deliberate What if the same book used to reject queer people actually holds powerful, undeniable stories of same-sex love, commitment, and heroism? The weight of that choice has crushed spirits. It's broken families. The passionate bond between David and Jonathan and the unbreakable vow between Ruth and Naomi are UNG stories of friendship. They re stories that point to a more inclusive faith that's been hiding in plain sight, a faith that's been intentionally pushed to the side, edited, and suppressed by religious institutions that chose power over truth and exclusion over love. Today, we're not just reading the Bible, we're taking it back. But what if that interpretation, the one that's caused so much damage, is based on a lie? What if I told you the Bible is filled with powerful stories of same-sex love and commitment, and your church has probably been ignoring them for centuries? If you grew up in almost any mainstream Christian church, you probably heard the official versions of these stories. They're served up as simple, straightforward tales of virtue. They're treated as the gold standard of platonic male friendship. Jonathan, the safe stories, they're inspiring, sure, but they're also incomplete. They smooth over the raw, passionate, and deeply challenging details that don't fit neatly into a heteronormative box. So, let's look at what the text actually says, and find the truth that's been hiding right in front of us. A prince, and David, the shepherd boy who would be king, had an amazing bond of loyalty. Jonathan protected David from his jealous father, King Saul, and they had each other's backs through all the political drama. The story is taught as a lesson in selfless friendship that goes beyond rivalry. Traditional readings celebrate Jonathan's loyalty to David, calling him the friend who sticks closer than a brother. It's a neat, tidy story about two guys who were the best of friends and nothing more. Perfect for Sunday school flannel graphs and easy sermon examples. Theirs is held up as a story of family devotion. Naomi, a widow who has lost everything, is heading back to her homeland alone. Her daughter-in-law Ruth, also a widow, refuses to leave her. Ruth's pledge of loyalty is shown as a beautiful example of commitment to family and, by extension, to Naomi's God. The romantic climax of the story, as it's traditionally told, is when Ruth marries Boaz, a rich landowner who saves her and Naomi from poverty. The focus lands on Ruth's piety and Boaz's generosity, all leading to a heterosexual marriage that puts them in the family line of Jesus. In this telling, the relationship between the two women is just the opening act for the real story. Ruth finding a husband, David and Jonathan, and Ruth and Naomi, these are the official stories. The story of David and Jonathan, from the books of Samuel, is one of the most emotionally intense stories in the entire Old Testament. Calling it just friendship means you have to ignore the incredibly romantic and binding language the text itself uses. The text says, "The soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul." This isn't how you talk about a new buddy, and Saul seems to get what's going on between them and he hates it. In 1 Samuel 20, when they know David has to run for his life, they meet in secret. When David hears the news, he sings a gut-wrenching lament. It's a poem full of grief for both Saul and Jonathan. David, a man who had multiple wives, declares that the love he shared with Jonathan was more wonderful, more profound, than any romance he'd ever had with a woman. And it doesn't explicitly say they had a sexual relationship, but the story gives overwhelming proof of a deep, homoerotic, and committed love. It shows us a relationship between two men defined by souls knit together, a binding covenant, and a love that David himself said was better than any other. This isn't just a story of friendship, it's a love story. Traditional readings try to explain this away, saying it's a different kind of love. But that means you have to ignore what David himself is saying. He is comparing his love for Jonathan directly to his love for women, and declaring Jonathan's love to be greater. But when he talks about Jonathan, his words become devastatingly intimate. In 2 Samuel 1 verse 26, David cries out, "I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant have you been to me. Your love to me was wonderful, surpassing the love of women." The Bible says they kissed each other and wept with one another until David This was not a formal peck on the cheek. This was a moment of intense, shared heartbreak between two people being ripped apart. In a furious outburst in 1 Samuel 20, Saul screams at Jonathan, "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, don't I know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame, and to the shame of your mother's nakedness?" That last part, shame of your mother's nakedness, is a euphemism for a sexual act. Saul is basically accusing his son of being in a relationship that brings disgrace to the family, a relationship he sees as a threat to his kingdom. The Hebrew word for knit is kashar, which means a deep, inseparable bond, like tying two lives into one. While many scholars see it as a deep platonic friendship, others argue the evidence points to a powerful homoerotic love. It starts in 1 Samuel 18, right after David beats Goliath. Jonathan then makes a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. This wasn't just a handshake. In the ancient world, a covenant was the most serious, binding agreement you could make, often used for treaties or marriages. As part of this, Jonathan does something wild. He strips off his royal robe, his armor, his sword, and his bow and gives them all to David. This is hugely symbolic. He's not just giving him presents, he's giving away his identity as the heir to the throne. He is literally clothing David in his own status, choosing him as his other half instead of his rival. Their commitment gets tested by Jonathan's father, King Saul, who is spiraling in a jealous rage against David. The depth of their love is most powerful in their goodbye, but the most famous, and maybe the most undeniable, proof comes after Jonathan is killed in battle. Let that sink in. Surpassing the love of women. This is not a fuzzy statement. So, what are we to make of this? The Bible doesn't use modern words like gay. Just like David and Jonathan's story got sanitized, the story of Ruth and Naomi got twisted to be all about a man, Boaz, when the emotional heart of the book is clearly the bond between two women. Queer readings of this story don't need to invent anything. They just have to pay attention to what the story actually focuses on. The book opens with tragedy. Naomi has lost her husband and both of her sons. She's left with her two daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth. Facing a future of complete ruin, Naomi decides to go back home to Bethlehem and tells the younger women to go back to their own families. Orpah, crying, leaves, but Ruth refuses. She clung to Naomi. The Hebrew word here is but it's clear that this is a story celebrating a lifelong, passionate, committed relationship between two women. Their bond is the driving force of the entire story. Ruth's vow is a perfect example of covenant love, giving us a powerful biblical model for a same-sex commitment that is faithful, redemptive, and blessed by God. Traditional readings quickly pivot to Boaz as the hero who rescues them, but that's not what the text shows. Ruth is the one driving the action. She is the one who, through her loyal love, saves Naomi's family line. When Ruth eventually has a child with Boaz, the townswomen don't congratulate Boaz. They say to Naomi, "A son has been born to Naomi." Ruth had a child for Naomi, securing her future. The story's happy ending isn't Ruth got a husband. It's Naomi is no longer empty. The whole story begins and ends with the bond between these two women. This is the same word used in Genesis 2:24, which says, "A man will cleave to his wife, and they will become one flesh." It's a word that means a profound, lifelong, covenantal bond. What Ruth says next is one of the most powerful declarations of love in the entire Bible. These words, which are so often used in heterosexual weddings, were first spoken from one woman to another. From Ruth 1, verses 16 and 17. "Do you want to ask me to leave you or to turn back from following you? For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me." Let's break that vow down. She is doing more than just saying, "I'll stick around." Ruth is making a complete, life-changing commitment. She's giving up her home, her people, her culture, and her own religion. She is tying her identity, her future, and even where she will be buried to Naomi. And she seals it by calling a curse on herself from the God of Israel if she ever breaks that promise. This is a covenant. It's a vow of absolute faithfulness until death, made between two women who chose each other when they had nothing. While many see this as a story of powerful female friendship, some scholars argue it can be read as a model for a same-sex relationship. So, were they lesbians? Again, the text doesn't say anything about their sexual lives. Beyond these powerful couples, the Bible also talks about including people who lived outside the gender and sexual norms of their time. In the ancient world, eunuch was a broader term than it is today. The law in Deuteronomy 23:1 is pretty blunt about it, saying that a man with damaged genitals shall not be admitted to the assembly of the Lord. In Isaiah 56, God gives this stunning message of inclusion. He promises these marginalized people a place of honor and a legacy that is even better than having children. He is a foreigner, a racial minority, and a sexual minority. This story is a powerful symbol of the radical inclusion of the early church. It shows that the old barriers of race, nationality, gender identity, sexual conformity have been torn down in Christ. For many LGBTQ Christians today, the story of the Ethiopian eunuch is like looking in a mirror. It is biblical proof that the people who have been pushed to the edges of religious society are exactly the ones God goes out of his way to welcome home. He's the ultimate outsider. He's on his way home from Jerusalem, where he had gone to worship but would have been denied full access to the temple because of the old law. He is reading from the scroll of Isaiah, probably the exact passage we just talked about. When God's Spirit tells the Apostle Philip to go talk to him, Philip explains the gospel, and the eunuch, seeing some water, asks, "What is to prevent me from being baptized?" This is a complete reversal of the old rules of exclusion. He says, "Let not the foreigner who has joined himself to the Lord say, 'The Lord will surely separate me from his people.' And let not the eunuch say, 'Behold, I am a dry tree.'" God then makes a direct promise to them. "To the eunuchs who keep my Sabbaths, who choose the things that please me and hold fast my covenant, I will give in my house and within my walls a monument and a name better than sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that shall not be cut off. They were seen as incomplete, unable to fulfill the command to be fruitful and multiply. They were outsiders. It could mean castrated men, but it was also used for a wider group of people who did unfit the typical family mold, including those born with ambiguous genitalia, those who were celibate, and likely those we might now see as gay or asexual. For a lot of Israel's history, eunuchs were shut out of the religious community. But then, the prophets start talking about a radical change. This is revolutionary. God is saying that belonging isn't based on your body or your ability to have kids. It's based on your faithfulness. And this promise comes to life in the New Testament. In Acts chapter 8, we meet an Ethiopian eunuch, a high-ranking official for the Queen of Ethiopia. Philip's answer is basically nothing. He baptizes the eunuch right then and there, bringing him completely into the new Christian community without a single hesitation. So if these stories are right there in the text, why don't we ever hear them? Why is the passionate love of David and Jonathan reduced to a buddy story? Why is the lifelong commitment of Ruth and Naomi ignored in favor of a marriage of convenience? The answer is complicated, but it boils down to a long history of interpretation that has pushed a very specific, patriarchal, and heteronormative agenda. For most of Christian history, the Bible was interpreted by men in deeply patriarchal societies. Their world was built on the idea of male headship and the need to have kids to carry on the family name. They've told us that God's love has conditions, that you only belong if you fit into a narrow mold. They are the Bible's LGBTQ heroes, hiding in plain sight, waiting for a generation brave enough to finally see them. Reclaiming these stories isn't about rewriting the Bible. It's about reading it honestly and completely for the first time. It is an affirmation that you do not have to choose between your faith and your identity. Your ability to love isn't a sin you need to repent for. It is a reflection of the divine. You belong. You are seen, and you are loved wonderfully and surpassingly. But the stories of David and Jonathan, Ruth and Naomi, and the Ethiopian eunuch tell a different story. They tell of a God who celebrates covenant love in all its beautiful forms. A God who sees and blesses the fierce devotion between two men whose souls are knit together as one. A God who honors the unbreakable promise between two women who choose each other as family. A God who sends his spirit racing across the desert to welcome the outcast into the heart of his family. It shows a deep discomfort with any kind of love that challenges the idea that a heterosexual, procreative marriage is the only one that matters. This led to a hardening of dogma and the stamping out of different perspectives. Theologians like John Chrysostom in the 4th century wrote viciously against same-sex relationships, and that viewpoint became dominant for centuries. Then, the rise of fundamentalism in the 19th and 20th centuries brought an even more rigid way of reading the Bible, one that often forces modern prejudices back onto the ancient text. The powerful bond between David and Jonathan had to be neutered to protect David's image as a righteous king. The deep commitment between Ruth and Naomi had to be downplayed to push the idea that a woman's only real fulfillment is in marrying a man. In that context, same-sex love was seen as either irrelevant or as a dangerous threat to the social order. Stories that didn't fit that mold were either ignored or reinterpreted. The voices of those who love differently have been silenced. The stories that show a bigger, more inclusive vision of God's love have been locked away. Taking these stories back is an act of liberation. It's about refusing to let one narrow, biased interpretation get the last word. It's about believing that the God of love is bigger than the boxes our religious institutions have tried to put him in. Discovering these stories can be both healing and difficult. It opens up a whole new way of seeing your faith and yourself. If any of this resonated with you, please consider subscribing for more content that explores faith, identity, and justice. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, someone who has felt hurt or pushed out by the church. And most importantly, I want to hear from you. What's your experience been with faith and these Bible stories? Share your thoughts and your story in the comments below. Let's build a community where we can keep having these conversations. Some official church lectionaries, the schedule of Bible readings for Sundays, have actually just skipped the most explicit verses about David and Jonathan's love, making sure congregations would never even hear them. This wasn't an accident. It's a form of censorship. Later on, as the church became a more powerful institution, it adopted many of the Roman Empire's rigid structures. The result is that for centuries, we've been handed a version of the Bible that's been filtered through fear and prejudice. For too long, the story has been controlled by people who use the Bible to exclude. These aren't fringe ideas we're forcing onto the text. They are truths that have been waiting to be seen.